I found the text on his phone at 2 a.m. Can't wait to see you tonight. I sat on the kitchen floor and let it buzz 5 more times, each one landing like a small hammer. For a second, I imagined yelling, smashing plates, making the scene every movie ever told me to make. Instead, I made coffee, folded his shirt, and went to work like everything was normal. Anger flared, then cooled into something very sharp: a plan. I began by making the impossible obvious. I printed the messages, backed up photos, and copied months of calendar entries where work conveniently ended at that woman's street. I didn't hide what I knew. I cataloged it. Then I talked to a lawyer, not to threaten, but to set up a clean, legal structure that would make the moment of reveal irreversible. The house was in my name. The car was registered to me. The savings were joint, but I quietly moved what I could into accounts he couldn't touch, leaving paper trails that favored me the way I wanted. Everything I did looked boring and sensible on paper. That's the point. Revenge dressed as bureaucracy is lethal. I didn't confront him. I fed him comfort. I cooked his favorite dinners. I laughed at his jokes in front of friends. I asked about the project and let him explain. He relaxed. That's when I stepped up the quiet dismantling. I emailed his boss about a concern, attached professionally redacted copies of the messages and dates he'd lied about. I also sent a copy to the HR director at his client's company. I wasn't dramatic. I sent a calm, fact-based note titled, "Potential Conflict of Interest and Misrepresented Travel." It sounded like something a concerned coworker would send. It was boring. It landed like a meteor. Next, I made sure witnesses existed. I reached out to the woman's neighbors, learning her routines, and I collected small corroborations: sightings, times, a receipt from a bar. I contacted one of his colleagues who'd once joked about Daniel's double life and asked him casually if he ever wanted to help a friend get the full picture. He did. People love to be useful. Suddenly, the trail I'd built wasn't only digital. It had living, breathing confirmation. On the weekend of his supposed work retreat, I executed the part I'd been waiting for. I invited his closest friends over for a barbecue. I made his favorite salad, set out beers, laughed louder than I felt. As everyone settled in, I asked one of his colleagues to pull up a slideshow. "For laughs," I said. The screen lit up with photos. Daniel at the client dinner. Daniel leaving the same restaurant at midnight. Daniel in pictures with the woman at places he'd told me were out-of-town conferences. I watched him flinch as each image clicked by. I didn't gloat. I gave him room to fall apart privately, then politely asked him to explain. He mumbled. He lied. People who'd known him for years watched. But the real move was the morning after. While everyone else talked and judged and filed many opinions, I had already sent his boss the HR packet with a note. "Given the above, I'm stepping down from managing those accounts. Please reassign." I'd also quietly signed forms to remove him as an authorized signer on a handful of joint business accounts we'd once used for a small rental property. Paperwork, again, boring to everyone else, crucifying to him. The accounts froze. The client removed him from the project. His phone, the little fortress he'd hidden behind, started ringing with messages from people who mattered. "We need clarification. We're reassigning. HR will contact you." He begged me, of course. At first on his knees, then in frantic texts, then through calls he left in the hundreds. I let voicemail pile up. I wanted him to feel the quiet I felt the night I read that first message. Not violent, not theatrical, but the small, endless silence of being cut off. I didn't want the cheap catharsis of screaming. I wanted him to watch his carefully built life disassemble while the world recorded it like a documentary. The woman he'd been sneaking around with? I passed the photos and dates to her employer, respectfully, neutrally, and watched the office handle it. She was pulled from her position pending investigation. The side relationship collapsed under its own awkwardness. People stopped wanting to be around secrets. Daniel's friends shifted, too. Betrayal erases easy loyalty. Some defended him at first. Most watched, then looked away. A week later, his car didn't start. I had already switched the title. The bank denied an emergency withdrawal. The rental property checks bounced because I changed signers and set a temporary hold, legally and cleanly. Everything inconveniently inconvenient happened at once, like dominoes arranged by a patient hand. No public shaming, no social media meltdown, just the slow, certain removal of the scaffolding he'd used to pretend nothing mattered. And then the crown of the revenge. I handed his best man a folder and asked him to read it out loud at a small gathering of close family. The folder contained the timeline and the facts. No insults, no theatrics. It read like evidence, and it was. We let him speak, and when he finished, the room felt colder. Daniel tried to laugh it off. Tried to say it was all complicated. Tried to promise change that looked too thin to be true. He sounded like a man improvising lines he'd never meant. People heard the truth. Friends left politely. A few stayed, but they were different. When the divorce papers arrived, it was clean. I wanted the legal separation to hum with inevitability, not vindictiveness. I walked out with the house, the car I'd always paid for, and the small rental that finally became mine to manage. More important, I walked out with my dignity intact, calm, planned, and verifiably in my favor. I sold one of the properties later, the profit helping me book a one-way ticket to Bali. Sitting on that plane, the city shrinking beneath me, I realized I hadn't wanted him to suffer in the way he'd made me suffer. I wanted the truth to be known, and for my life to continue with space for something better. That's what I got. People ask if I felt bad, about withholding heartbreak, about playing it cool instead of burning everything down. The answer is no. The sweetest moment wasn't his pleading or his losing friends. It was waking up the next morning, knowing I could choose a life without him, and that I had the means to make it real. My revenge was not revenge at all when it was over. It was the careful recovery of what was mine. Peace, power, and the quiet joy of watching someone realize they'd miscalculated you.